After our parents passed away, grief filled the house. Emily, the younger sister, trusted her brother, Michael, to handle the inheritance fairly. He stepped forward, acting responsible, taking charge of all the legal and financial matters. Emily believed her brother would honor their parents' wishes. But what Michael didn't realize was that their father had hidden one final clause in the will. A single line that would ruin everything he thought he had won. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a museum of quiet, a place where every object remembered a voice that no longer spoke. After our parents passed away, grief set into the walls like a winter that refused to thaw. Their bedroom stayed closed, and yet I could still picture my mother folding the last batch of laundry, my father humming low as he wound his old watch beside the lamp. I'm Emily, the younger one. People told me I was the soft-hearted sibling, the one who cried at commercials and saved birthday cards long after the confetti was swept away. They said my brother, Michael, was the strong one. He certainly looked the part at the funeral too, composed, shaking hands with relatives, making sure the service ran on time. More than one person squeezed my shoulder and nodded toward him. You're lucky to have a brother like that. He'll look out for you. I wanted to believe it, because believing was easier than facing the fact that our parents were gone. And I didn't know how to breathe without their rhythm guiding mine. In the first week, Michael took over the logistics death certificates, the bank, the safety deposit box, a polite but firm call to the lawyer's office to schedule a review of the will. He told me I didn't need to stress about paperwork. He'd handle it. You're grieving, he said with a gentleness that felt like a blanket. Let me be the responsible one. And viewers, let me ask you something. When someone offers to carry your burden in the middle of your heartbreak, do you hand it over without looking? Do you sign where they point because you trust them, or do you make yourself read every last line? Even if it means you might discover something you don't want to see. I chose trust. Maybe that was naive, or maybe it was love. I signed documents after skimming them, nodded during phone calls I wasn't part of, and told myself this was what families did. They showed up. They divided pain. They didn't keep score. But grief doesn't turn bad people into good ones. It only removes the noise that hides who they really are. And somewhere between condolence flowers and casserole dishes, Michael's helpfulness hardened into control. He stopped describing the process and started dictating it. He kept folders in his office that I wasn't invited to open. When the lawyer called, he walked into the garden to take the call. His voice a low blade I could barely hear. I told myself it was fine, he was just being protective. Still, you know that pressure in your chest when something's off? The kind that doesn't shout but whispers the same warning over and over? There was a whisper in our house now. It followed Michael from room to room. Weeks blurred into each other like rain on glass. I tried to keep busy cleaning out the pantry, boxing up winter coats for donation, placing our mother's porcelain birds on a higher shelf so they wouldn't break. Meanwhile, Michael became a man who belonged to closed doors. He lived inside meetings, signed for packages I didn't recognize, and laughed a little too loudly when friends came over. We're handling things, he'd say if I hovered near a stack of envelopes. and the word we was always the first lie to enter the room. One afternoon, I found a letter tucked into the day's mail, an official-looking envelope stamped with the county seal. It was addressed to Michael, but it had my parents' address on it, our address, so I opened it. The words were plain and merciless. Transfer of title. The family home, the house where we learned to ride bikes in the driveway and fell asleep under Christmas lights, was now in Michael's name alone. No joint ownership, no mention of me. I stood there, the counter edge digging into my hip, and read the paragraph again, slower. My hands shook. Michael, I called, and he appeared in the doorway with a drink in his hand, a slice of light on his shoulder, as if the sun had chosen him. What is this? I asked, holding out the paper. He glanced at it with the lazy confidence of someone who has already rehearsed the conversation. It's what needed to happen, he said. The house has to be in one name for clarity. You don't want the headache of 10 signatures every time we fix the roof. He took a sip, watching me over the rim of his glass. I'm simplifying things for both of us. I felt my throat close. Dad and Mom wanted us to share, I said. They said we'd handle everything together. Michael smiled the way a cat smiles at a songbird. You're being emotional, he said. You've always been emotional. I'm the one who understands legal structure, taxes, maintenance, the whole machine. Be grateful I'm taking responsibility. Do you hear that, viewers? Has anyone ever used your grief as proof that you're unfit to make decisions? I set the letter on the table slowly, like it might explode. What about the savings? Mom's jewelry? Dad's watch collection? I asked. He rolled his wrist in a small, elegant flick. All under management, he said. I'll allocate what's necessary. You're not cut out for this. The way he said this like this was power, and I was kindergarten made my chest burn. Michael, this is our family, I said. Not a business. He leaned in, and for the first time I saw something ugly behind his eyes, a delight in the fact that I was powerless. Families are the first businesses, he said softly, and Dad knew that. That's why he trusted me. He walked away before I could answer. Later that night, I found a second letter buried under a pizza coupon on the counter confirming his exclusive access to our father's brokerage account. The numbers were large enough to make me dizzy. I sat at the table alone, and I'm not ashamed to tell you I cried. But there was a moment, even through the tears, when I heard my father's voice, not a ghost, not a miracle, just the memory of the way he would kneel beside me when I was little and say, "Breathe, Em. Count to 10. Good decisions never need to shout." So I dried my face, and I counted 1 to 10, and then I started paying attention. I watched how Michael stiffened whenever the lawyer's name came up. I watched how he redirected conversations with expensive jokes. I watched how he avoided our father's study, where the old metal filing cabinet lived, sticky handle, dented side, top drawer that squealed like a violin. He used to tease Dad about that cabinet. The Jurassic drawer, he called it. Nothing in there but dead trees. But Dad kept important things there, not because it was modern, but because it was his. And that's the thing about people who love control. They forget that humble places can hold the sharpest tools. The night everything shifted, the house was full of laughter that didn't belong to us. Michael had invited friends over new friends, the kind that smell like leather seats, and invitations-only clubs. Music pulsed low through the floorboards. I stayed upstairs, trying to read, but the bass kept tugging at the corners of the page. Around 11, the laughter grew louder, then skidded into a hush. I peeked over the banister. Michael stood in the foyer with his girlfriend, Alyssa, her hair like a magazine ad, his arm around her waist. He opened our mother's jewelry box, the one with the blue velvet lining, and lifted out the strand of pearls Dad saved for their 40th anniversary. Alyssa clapped, and Michael draped the pearls around her neck as if he were crowning a queen. People cheered. I nearly said something, then nearly came down the stairs like a storm. But I caught my breath on the first step and turned back. Breathe, I count to 10. The next morning, when the house smelled like spilled champagne and dying flowers, I went into Dad's study. I closed the door, shut the blinds, and knelt in front of the old cabinet. The top drawer stuck, as always. I tugged, and it screamed, as always. Inside, envelopes, rubber-banded bundles of notes in Dad's hand. A stack of carbon copies, the title to the car we sold when the transmission failed. A worn brown folder with the lawyer's letterhead peeking out. My heart thudded in my throat. I didn't find a treasure map. I didn't need one. I found something better, a trail of careful decisions my father had made in ink. Patient as a gardener planting in winter for spring he knew he might never see. A notarized addendum. A memo to the attorney. A letter to both of us, Michael and me, that had never been mailed because, by the date stamped in the corner, he must have passed away before he could send it. The language wasn't dramatic. Dad had never liked dramatics. It was precise. It said, in effect, if any heir attempts to unilaterally seize control of estate assets or intentionally exclude the other, the distribution will trigger a contingency clause on final reading, reassigning control and imposing penalties. I didn't need to be a lawyer to understand the outline. My father hadn't trusted speeches. He trusted structure. He trusted the lawyer who'd handled his accounts for 25 years. He trusted that the right line, in the right place, would turn arrogance into a trapdoor. I sat back on the study rug and laughed just once. The kind of laugh that breaks from relief and anger at the same time. Then I folded the documents neatly, returned them to the folder, and locked the cabinet. I didn't tell Michael what I'd read. Why should I? He had told me for months that I wouldn't understand the legal side. Let him live inside his narrative for a little longer. Let him think the world revolved according to the paperwork he'd skimmed and the signatures he'd bullied from me. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever known something that your enemy doesn't and felt the power of that quiet knowledge settle into your bones? I didn't need to confront him in the kitchen. I didn't need to shout in the foyer. I needed patience. I needed the next meeting with the lawyer, the formal reading. Michael had been postponing with excuses about scheduling, so I called the office myself. The assistant knew my voice from childhood. Her name is Ruth, and she used to slip me butterscotch candies while I waited for Dad in the lobby. Next Thursday, 10 a.m., she said. I'll put you and your brother on the calendar. When I told Michael, he smirked like a man who'd already given his victory speech. Great, he said. We'll get it wrapped up. He poured himself another drink and didn't see, or chose not to see, that my hands were steady now. That night, he threw another little celebration in the living room, just a handful of friends. A victory lap in advance. Alyssa wore the pearls again. I watched from the hallway the way you watch a movie when you've already read the ending. And to you watching this, I've got a question. Do you think silence is weakness? Or do you understand it can be strategy, the kind that lets the ground shift under someone's feet while they dance? Next Thursday at 10 a.m., a door would close behind us in a quiet office. A folder would open, and a single line would do what I couldn't have done with 1,000 arguments. Michael believed he'd taken everything. He believed he'd won. But the will didn't care about his belief, and my father's handwriting had already chosen the moment when the truth would stand up, clear its throat, and ruin him. The days leading to Thursday stretched like wire pulled too tight. Michael strutted through the house as if it were a stage, rehearsing lines to an audience that existed only in his imagination. He had convinced himself that the inheritance was already locked in his name, that Thursday's meeting was nothing more than a formality where he'd receive applause. For being the responsible heir, he ordered new furniture, sleek leather couches that arrived in a truck Emily hadn't expected. The delivery men stomping across their mother's carpets as if her memory meant nothing. He hosted dinners for his friends, bragging that he was about to expand the portfolio, his words slick with champagne. At night, when the house finally quieted, Emily would stand in the doorway of her parents' study and press her hand against the cool wood of the filing cabinet where the truth lay hidden. She wanted to scream, to shove the documents under Michael's nose and watch the smugness slide off his face. But her father's voice echoed in her mind. Good decisions never need to shout. So she stayed silent, holding her cards close. And viewers, let me ask you, if you had evidence that could destroy your enemy tomorrow, would you reveal it today just to see them squirm? Or would you wait, let them dig their own grave, and strike when the silence becomes unbearable? Emily chose patience. Every boast Michael made, every smirk he threw her way, only fed her determination. He thought she was naive, blind, unfit to hold responsibility. But in reality, she was watching him write his own downfall, one arrogant action at a time. She noticed how he avoided the lawyer's phone calls, postponing the meeting twice before Emily finally insisted. It's scheduled, Michael, she said firmly one morning, sliding the appointment card across the table. He waved his hand like a king bored of his servant. Fine. 10 minutes. Signatures. Done. He leaned back, grinning. You'll thank me someday, Em. This whole thing would have crushed you. She met his gaze and, for the first time in months, didn't look away. Quietly, she thought, no, Michael, this will crush you. Michael's arrogance spilled into every corner of their lives. He paraded Alyssa through the house in their mother's pearls, her heels clicking against the hardwood as if she were measuring rooms she thought she owned. Emily caught fragments of conversations, Michael telling Alyssa about liquidating assets, about a vacation property fund, about putting Emily in her place. She learned to keep her face neutral, to nod as if she were uninterested, but inside she memorized every word. The night before the lawyers' meeting, Michael threw a small gathering in the living room. Bottles clinked, laughter roared, and Michael stood in the center like a crowned prince. Tomorrow, he declared, raising his glass, it becomes official. My parents left everything in my hands, just as it should be. I'll honor their memory by expanding it, growing it, making it more than they ever could. People cheered. Alyssa kissed his cheek, her eyes glittering like victory. But Emily, standing quietly in the hallway, felt only the heavy thud of her father's words from the letter she'd found. If any heir attempts to unilaterally seize control. The words repeated like a drumbeat in her mind. Tomorrow, Michael's victory would collapse under that single clause. She slipped upstairs while the party thundered on, sat on the edge of her bed, and whispered to herself, Dad, I hope you knew how much this would matter. I hope you knew patience would be my shield. She didn't sleep much that night. The house vibrated with music and arrogance, but underneath it, she heard something else: anticipation, like a storm gathering at the edges of the sky. Viewers, let me pull you into her shoes. If you knew the next morning held a secret that could shatter someone's pride, could you keep your face calm through the night? Or would you burst, unable to hold the secret even for a few more hours? Morning arrived sharp and unkind. The house smelled of stale alcohol and wilting roses from the party. But Michael was already dressed in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back as though he were attending a coronation. Ready, sis? He asked with mock cheer. Emily didn't reply. She wore a simple black dress, her mother's silver bracelet on her wrist, and carried herself with quiet dignity. They drove in silence, the city blurring past the windows. Michael tapped on his phone, barking orders to someone about stocks and accounts, while Emily kept her eyes on the horizon, steady, waiting. At the lawyer's office, Ruth, the assistant, greeted them warmly. Emily, it's been years, she said, squeezing her hand. Michael barely acknowledged her, striding ahead like a man convinced the world belonged to him. Inside the conference room, the lawyer Mr. Harrison sat with a thick folder in front of him. His eyes lingered on Emily for a moment, then shifted to Michael. Thank you both for coming, he said. Michael spread his arms, grinning. Let's get this over with. I've got plans this afternoon. Emily folded her hands in her lap, silent, patient, steady. Mr. Harrison opened the folder, the rustle of paper louder than the city outside. He began to read formal words, allocations, numbers, the expected rhythm of legal language. Michael leaned back in his chair, smugness radiating off him. But Emily leaned forward, listening for the moment she knew was coming. And viewers, here's where I'll leave you for now. The clause hasn't been spoken yet, but the air is thick with it. What do you think will happen when the lawyer reaches that hidden line? Will Michael's smirk survive the truth, or will it vanish in an instant? Tell me in the comments, because tomorrow has arrived, and the downfall is about to begin. The conference room smelled faintly of leather chairs and old paper. The kind of room built to hold secrets until the right moment forced them into daylight. Michael sprawled across his chair as though it were a throne, one leg crossed, his arm draped lazily over the armrest. He looked at the lawyer with the smile of a man about to receive good news he already believed belonged to him. "Let's not waste time," he said. "We all know what this says." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and began reading aloud from the will, his voice steady and professional. He listed the estate's assets, the house, the savings accounts, the investments, and as each word echoed through the room, Michael's grin widened. He nodded after every line, glancing at Emily like a victor savoring his triumph. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed but her heart beat loud in her chest. Viewers, let me ask you, have you ever sat in a room knowing a storm was about to break, while everyone else thought the sky was clear? That was Emily's reality. Michael believed the will was his coronation, but Emily knew her father better than that. Her father had trusted structure, foresight, and quiet justice. So when Mr. Harrison turned the page and paused, adjusting his glasses again as his tone shifted, Emily leaned forward ever so slightly. Michael barely noticed he was too busy straightening his tie, smirking like a man who had already won. "Now," the lawyer said, his voice firmer, "we come to a conditional clause, one that activates if any heir attempts to unilaterally control or exclude the other from their rightful share." The words landed like stones dropped into water. Michael blinked, his smirk faltering for the first time. "What?" he asked, a laugh tugging at the edges of his voice. Mr. Harrison continued, reading line after precise line, each word drafted by their father's careful hand years earlier. Emily kept her eyes fixed on Michael, watching arrogance slowly turn into confusion. And inside, she whispered, "This is it, Dad. This is the moment you planted." Michael shifted in his seat, his confident posture cracking like plaster under pressure. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "Dad would never. He trusted me to handle everything." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, tapping the notarized page gently with his pen. "Your father anticipated disputes. He believed fairness required accountability. This clause is legally binding, and it transfers immediate control of contested assets to the excluded heir in this case, Emily." Silence filled the room, thick and sharp. Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at Emily as though she had betrayed him, when in reality he had betrayed himself. "You knew about this, didn't you?" he hissed at her, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Emily didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply met his stare with calm, steady eyes. "Dad knew you," she said softly, "and he knew me. He prepared for this." Michael slammed his fist on the table, rattling the water glasses. "This is insane. I've already moved assets. Which will now be reversed." Mr. Harrison interrupted firmly. "Fraudulent transfers will not stand. The law is clear. Viewers, imagine sitting across from someone who spent months mocking you, belittling you, telling you that you were weak only to watch their face collapse as the truth finally arrives. Would you smile in that moment, or would you stay silent like Emily, letting justice speak louder than revenge ever could?" Michael's hands shook. His suit, once perfectly arranged, suddenly seemed to tight, his collar choking him. Alyssa, sitting beside him with her manicured nails gripping his arm, whispered, "Michael, what does this mean?" He shoved her hand away, sweat beading on his forehead. For the first time, the man who thought he controlled everything realized he controlled nothing. The lawyer continued reading, detailing the exact reassignments, the house title reverting to joint ownership, the accounts frozen pending transfer, penalties enacted for attempts at concealment. Each sentence was another nail in the coffin of Michael's arrogance. Emily didn't interrupt. She sat still, listening to the structure of her father's foresight unfold like a symphony written years before. Michael's voice broke into desperate fragments, pleas, threats, denials. "This can't hold up. Dad wanted me in charge. You can't do this." His words echoed but carried no weight. Mr. Harrison remained unmoved, his decades of experience steadying the process. At last, he closed the folder with a soft thud. "That concludes the reading. Emily, by the authority of this clause, control of the estate now passes to you." For a moment, Emily almost couldn't breathe. She hadn't wanted riches. She hadn't wanted power. She had wanted fairness, respect, the dignity her brother had stripped away in his rush for control. She looked at Michael, his face pale, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with a fear he couldn't disguise. And in that silence, she finally spoke, not with anger, not with triumph, but with quiet truth. "Dad always said greed destroys families," she whispered. "You didn't just betray me, Michael. You betrayed him." His eyes darted, searching for escape. But there was none. The walls of his empire, built on arrogance and shortcuts, were crumbling. And Emily sat steady in the middle of it, her patience now revealed as her greatest weapon. Viewers, let me ask you before we continue, if you were Emily, would you forgive him now that justice has arrived? Or would you let him sit in the ruins he created for himself? Comment below, because this is just the turning point, and Michael's unraveling has only begun. The silence after Mr. Harrison closed the folder seemed heavier than anything Emily had ever known. Michael's smirk, the same arrogant expression he had worn for months, had dissolved into something pale and ugly, a face twisted by shock and desperation. He lurched to his feet, his chair screeching against the polished floor, and jabbed a trembling finger toward the lawyer. "This isn't real. It can't be real. My father would never. He wouldn't dare hand her everything." His words cracked like glass under pressure, his voice echoing in the small conference room. Mr. Harrison remained steady, folding his hands over the folder as though he had anticipated this very outburst. "Michael," he said calmly, "your father didn't hand everything to anyone. He created a safeguard, one that triggered only because of your actions. He believed in fairness, but he also believed in consequences. You attempted to strip your sister of her rightful share, and in doing so, you activated the clause he put in place years ago." Michael's chest heaved, sweat prickling at his temples. He spun toward Emily, his eyes wild, searching for an ally, for a lifeline that wasn't there. "You knew," he hissed. "You knew, and you let me walk into this trap." Emily didn't rise from her seat. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who had finally stepped out of the shadows of silence. "I didn't set the trap, Michael. Dad did. He knew who you were becoming, and he loved us enough to protect me from you." For the first time since their parents' death, Emily felt her words land with the weight of truth. Not as a weapon, but as justice. Michael staggered back, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Viewers, let me ask you something. If you had betrayed your family, mocked them, stolen from them, and now faced the collapse of everything you built, what would you do? Would you beg for forgiveness? Would you fight against the inevitable? Or would you crumble under the truth you tried so hard to bury?" Michael did all three at once, and none of them with grace. The days that followed were a slow unraveling of the empire Michael had built out of lies and arrogance. The accounts he boasted about at parties were frozen, locked down by the court until the transfers could be reversed. The car he flaunted with pride was repossessed in broad daylight, the sound of the tow truck echoing through the neighborhood. As curious neighbors peeked through their curtains, vendors who had once toasted him now demanded repayment. Phone calls poured in, not with congratulations, but with threats of lawsuits. And Alyssa, the girlfriend who had worn their mother's pearls like a crown, vanished as quickly as she had appeared, leaving behind only a note on the kitchen counter. "You promised me wealth. I didn't sign up for ruin." Michael read it aloud, his voice breaking, then crumpled the paper in his fist. He stormed through the house like a caged animal, shouting about betrayal, about injustice, about how no one understood him. But Emily understood perfectly. She had watched him trade love for greed, dignity for arrogance, and now he was tasting the bitterness of his own choices. One evening, he cornered her in the hallway, his eyes bloodshot, his suit rumpled like a costume he no longer fit into. "You did this," he spat, his voice trembling with rage and fear. "You ruined me." Emily looked at him for a long moment, remembering every slight, every insult, every smug laugh at her expense. And then she spoke, her words sharp not with malice, but with truth. "No, Michael, you ruined yourself. Dad gave you everything, his trust, his guidance, his love, and you turned it into arrogance. This isn't my doing. This is yours." The words seemed to pierce him deeper than any shout could have. He stumbled back, his face crumbling as the reality sank in. Viewers, picture this moment. If you had the chance to strike your betrayer with words, would you twist the knife? Or would you, like Emily, let the truth itself do the cutting? The final confirmation came a week later at the lawyer's office. Emily sat across from Mr. Harrison as he handed her the finalized documents, the ink still fresh, her father's foresight now etched into law. She traced her fingers over the signature, her chest tightening with emotion. This wasn't about the estate. It wasn't about money or property. It was about respect, about the father who had seen beyond grief, who had known his children well enough to prepare for this very day. As she stepped out of the office into the bright morning sun, she felt something she hadn't in months: lightness, a sense that her parents' presence hadn't vanished, but lived within her choices, her patience, her resilience. Michael followed behind her, his steps dragging, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of his own greed had finally broken him. He looked smaller, diminished, stripped of the arrogance that once cloaked him. For a moment, Emily turned to him, her eyes soft with the echo of the love they had once shared as siblings. "Dad was right," she said quietly. "Greed destroys families. But it doesn't have to destroy you unless you let it." Michael's lips parted, but no reply came. He stood there, silent, in the shadow of his own ruin, while Emily walked forward into the sunlight. The documents pressed to her chest like a promise kept. And to you, viewers, I leave this question. What would you have done if you were Emily? Would you forgive your brother now that justice has been served, or would you walk away, letting him face the ruins of his choices alone? Justice doesn't always roar, it doesn't always come with fists or fire. Sometimes it waits quietly, like a line hidden in a will, like a truth written years before, waiting for its moment to rise. Emily didn't need revenge. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had patience, she had dignity, and in the end, that was enough not only to ruin her brother's false empire, but to restore herself. And that's where this story ends, but the questions don't stop here. What would you have done if you were in Emily's place? Would you forgive a brother who betrayed you? Or would you let him sit in the ruins of his own choices? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, because I love hearing your perspectives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe for more tales where justice is served. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time, remember, patience isn't weakness, it's power waiting for the right moment.